Well, today we're going to be talking about accelerating growth and confidence with a feasibility study. Um, I am excited to really break this down for y'all. Let's talk a little bit about what feasibility studies are, why they're important, and how really you can use the data and findings from a feasibility study to guide your work. I think regardless of where you are, if you've conducted a feasibility study, are thinking about ever doing one, or just want a little more information, we can take a lot of the components of this and apply them very relevantly to wherever we are. So with that, let's move into the first slide. Feasibility studies are really important in a really important planning process, right? What exactly is it? It helps us to assess the capacity to meet fundraising goals. If we just say, hey, I'm going to raise money for this project, program, whatever we have a need, let's go and get started. We really have no way of knowing how close to our financial goals we realistically can get and what kind of roadmap we might need to take to get there, right? So it helps us assess that capacity within our market to reach the goals that we have identified that we need to achieve our projects, right? So it's going to help confirm areas of interest among prospects, right? What is that project appeal? Personally, I've multiple times been involved with things where we kind of thought that we could get the community behind something, but we were able to assess that there might be something a little more compelling. And if you have the ability to say, would you like an apple or an orange? And everybody wants the apple, but you're trying to sell them the orange. If you have the ability to swap that, you can raise more funds sometimes. So just like projects, just like pieces of it, there may be something that we didn't know that we can uncover in a feasibility study that really helps us with that project appeal. Again, our goal is to help optimize the effort so we can maximize the revenue and have the biggest impact possible. So by having conversations with people through a feasibility study, we can really hone into where those interest levels are so we can focus on the right things, both from that project appeal as well as messaging. Can help kind of moving into that. It can inform strategy for solicitation and communication, right? Sometimes people are telling us exactly what they would give to, and we need to be sure to be able to convey that that's an important part of our program. The strategy for solicitation, again, it's going to be informed by people saying, well, this is why I choose to give to this organization, or why I choose to be philanthropic in life, or what moves me and motivates me. And here's what I think is important and what you should focus on. Anytime we're able to get a large group of people to share those thoughts with us, it can really help inform our best roadmap forward for the biggest impact possible. It helps source prospects, right? A feasibility study, we are asking questions about who do you know that can help make this effort successful. So we're looking for prospects. We're looking for major gift prospects. We're looking for volunteer potential prospects. It helps us absolutely expand that network through a wider net. People are very comfortable in feasibility studies to talk about their perspectives and who they know that might be able to help make the effort successful. And lastly, but definitely not least, this is one of the most important pieces, I think, to a feasibility study, is it's going to establish confidence among key constituents, right? They know that not only are you doing your homework, you're gathering data, you're listening to their feedback, and it also gives them a say in the success. And if they're already saying, yes, I think you can be successful, and here are some things I know, they're going to have confidence in what you're doing before you even ever get started. So in a feasibility study, we're able to gather all of this information. So if I haven't already sold you on why we would want to do that, right? These are all important things. I think this is a really great statistic from the Urban Institute of Nonprofit Research Collaborative, found that 82% of nonprofits that conducted a feasibility study prior to a capital campaign achieved their goals, compared to only 52% for those that did not. So just let that soak in. That's a pretty big gap there, right? It's not saying that if you don't do a feasibility study, you're not going to be successful, but if it's like a roll of the dice, a 50-50 chance, flipping the coin, 52%, I would want to do my homework and set it up for success on the front end, right? So that you don't have those roadblocks, don't have those, slowdowns, things like that. So I think hopefully this is why we should be interested in learning a bit more. Moving on to the next slide. I want to just give you sort of an overview of what this would look like, and then I'm going to hand it over to Michaela and Jake to dive into these 6 topics, what this actually would look like for me and my organization if I chose to embark on a feasibility study. We're testing again for that project appeal, right? Maybe you have something very specific you're setting out to achieve. Maybe you're just wanting to elevate your efforts and you have lots of avenues you could go down. So whether you're trying to test for something specific or you're trying to take a wide range of things that you have the possibility to make an impact on and hone that in, that's helpful in this space. So project appeal, financial goals, and a gift pyramid, right? We know that we want to make sure that we are setting a realistic but challenging goal, and a gift pyramid to support that with a plan. Prospective donor and volunteer lists, what that looks like. Again, like I mentioned, that constituent buy-in, by having people involved in the process and really listening to what they're saying, you're definitely moving them along. You're cultivating them essentially. Those timelines and prioritization, and then finally the organizational structure we recommend for that roadmap to best move it forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Michaela to get started on the first point.
Great. Thank you so much, Marty. So let's start off with testing project appeal and why this is important and valuable to incorporate in your feasibility study. And to kick that off, I'm going to tell a brief story. So I had a donor as a part of a campaign. The goal was to solicit them for a $7 million gift. We went in and they loved our organization, but the gift came in at $1 million. And we were gutted. We were like, this did not go well. What went wrong? Ultimately, upon reflection, we knew it was because we didn't pair that donor with the right project that inspired them. They cared about us, they wanted to help, but they weren't compelled to give their best gift. So we thought a little bit. We knew, okay, based on this feasibility study we had conducted, we knew this person really cared about our organization from a personal standpoint, but their philanthropy was driven by the impact our organization had on our city. So we restructured. We had an economic impact study done by McKinsey, brought that project to this donor, explained these two projects that really were a large part of our driver in our community. We had, $1 into the organization, $4 out to our city, and we actually had greater economic impact than the Pittsburgh Steelers. That kind of shocked them. And with that compelling ask that met their interest or the appeal to them, we were able to increase that gift to $5 million and kind of get back on track. So this is why testing appeal is so valuable. Can we move to the next slide, please? So as you test appeal in your feasibility study, this is kind of what it looks like for you. Your organization outlines a few projects or areas of opportunity that you would like to test with your key constituency as a part of a feasibility study. If you've just conducted a strategic plan, probably some of those projects are going to be sourced directly from that. If you have not conducted a strategic plan recently, this is a great exercise to conduct with your board and key staff members. Really think through, okay, what is our vision for the next few years? What are the top projects we think are really going to help us meet our mission? So you outline these projects, and then we bring them to your key constituents in confidential interviews, surveys, and in some cases, focus groups. And this provides an opportunity for your prospective donors, your community members, your board members to provide their feedback in a confidential setting and really drill down what is resonating with them. This allows you the chance to pair your organization's need and direction with what is going to inspire your donors to give their best gift. It informs your strategy. It informs your communication as to how you're going to build out this campaign and really bring a group of donors to meet that ultimate goal. So this is why testing project appeal is important. So now you've got your project appeal, and next slide, please. What do we do with that? As a part of a feasibility study, you are testing the financial potential of a campaign. So what is that goal figure that you're going to aim for? And then also a part of this feasibility study, you'll receive a gift pyramid or a roadmap to achieving that goal. So what you're seeing here is a $5 million campaign goal and a roadmap to how to build this out. What level of giving? How many donors do you need in these various segments? We need $2 million gifts. How many prospects do we need for that level of giving? We're going to aim for 4. It gives us a roadmap to sort of build out our strategy and help direct our energy. So you've got this financial goal and a gift pyramid, and you're probably like, well, that's nice, Michaela, but how do we actually build this out? And that brings us to the next piece of the feasibility study, and that is your prospect and volunteer list. And as a fundraiser or an executive director, CEO, whatever your role is, this is often one of the most exciting pieces of a feasibility study because you get a list of names of potential donors throughout this process sourced by your key constituents, as well as a list of potential volunteers, and they'll overlap a little bit. Part of the value in receiving a list of prospective donors sourced by your key constituents is that it gives you some really valuable insight as a fundraiser. These are the names, these are the people that my community expects to see as a part of this campaign and will instill confidence in them for our ability to achieve this ultimate goal together. Then the volunteer list is great. It gives you an idea of, oh, I didn't know so-and-so was quite as connected as our community realizes they are. Let's find the right place for them on this initiative. In addition to that long list of potential volunteers, Pride in our feasibility studies, we will outline those that self-identify. And this is just solid gold because it gives you as a fundraiser, executive director, whatever your title is, a list of people to go to immediately. They've already raised their hand in the feasibility study process and said, I would like to participate. I'd like to help you in a fundraising initiative. Now it's just a matter of going through a job description and making sure they really understand what they raised their hand for and finding the right fit for them. You get to hit the ground running. This supports you and your organization in building out your universe throughout the campaign. So now you've got a prospect list, and next slide, please. Now let's talk through some of the strengths that you'll have in your pocket as a result of a feasibility study. You've got your campaign goal to start off with, a gift pyramid, prospect lists, but you also have a data-informed resource to back you up. So there are 2 key constituencies that this is really going to support you with. The first is your board and key staff members. And then the second is your prospective donors. Let's talk about the board and key staff first. They're gonna want to know, is this going to be successful? We're going to ramp up our fundraising. How are we going to really do this? Your feasibility study outlines what is possible, who you're going to connect with first, any adjustments you're going to make on your volunteer structure to help you succeed in ramping up this effort. It will provide a timeline, which Jake will talk about in a moment, but it gives you all this information to show this is our work plan. This is how we're going to execute. That's instilling confidence internally, right? It also instills confidence externally with your lead prospective donors. Ideally, you've invited them to participate as a part of the interview process, And their buy-in is already kind of started as they're giving you their feedback along the way. Now you go to your prospective donors, say, we've finished this report. Thank you for your participation. This is what we found. This is our work plan. These are the people we're going to reach out to and invite to be a part of this process. And they know that you have done your homework, that you are ready to execute in a data-informed way. So you've got buy-in from your board and staff, as well as your lead donors. You're ready to succeed. Now, Jake's going to take some time and talk a little bit about your personal work plan through the timeline.
Great. In addition to getting kind of a destination, we know it's important to also have a roadmap on how to get there. It's like, oh, we're in New York, we got to drive to San Francisco. But if we have no idea what route to take, it's going to take us substantially longer to get there, obviously. So building out kind of a month-to-month timeline, a work plan, what priorities should go in each slot month by month really makes a big difference. And in building out the analysis for the feasibility study, you can get a really detailed month-to-month kind of to-do list that you just kind of execute. Give yourself permission to delay some things, focus on certain things in the beginning to make sure that you're successful. They tend to be pretty long, multi-year projects. So it's helpful to have kind of a vision of where you're going so that you prioritize correctly. The first things that you're kind of looking at is just guidelines on what you do in what order. Obviously, at the onset of a campaign, there's so much to do and there's so many things to set up that you can be overwhelmed about, well, which do we start? Do we kind of launch everything at once? Or do we focus on one thing and complete it sequentially? But just kind of what pieces do we attack right from the beginning? Obviously, right at the top of the list is recruitment. Michaela mentioned some of these volunteers, your campaign leadership, getting them on board and having them a part of the planning process and a part of the build out of the campaign structure is obviously critical. So taking the steps to correctly recruit them and make sure that they have a clear understanding of their roles, set expectations, any training that's needed has to come sort of top of list. So kind of building out the recruitment of all your volunteers, what your board's role is, all of that. The next is looking at your lead gifts. Obviously, right from the beginning, the most helpful thing to start with is cash. So if you're looking to bring in revenue, the first thing you want to do is go to your biggest and easiest yeses. But in what order? If you have 58 major gift prospects from the study that you've generated, how do you decide which ones you go to first? You can't talk to them all on Tuesday. Who are you going to go see first on Tuesday? So kind of figuring out the sequence of, well, we need to get this group first, and this is going to be an easy one, and that one's a little larger. We know that this one might take longer, so we're actually going to start it expecting that gift to come in later. But what are the order for all the donors that we approach in the beginning and kind of built out through the rest of the campaign? The next is how do we communicate our overall messaging? This is a pretty broad category. In the beginning, we go kind of laser focused, like super concise case for support, before, during, and after that we can pitch in 90 seconds to someone who's never heard of us before. Assumedly, if we're going to talk to some of our lead gift donors, they're people who are more familiar with our organization and our mission already, but not always. We want to have a very clear understanding of what we're trying to accomplish so that as the campaign grows and we kind of move into the public, more visible launch phase, that we have a larger packet of materials. This may be more physical paper collateral. It may be more stuff on your website. It might be a very beautifully designed campaign video that you can share on social media, or a send ahead, a leave behind to donor visits. But what are those things? We can't make them all at once. In what order do we sequence those things? And the last thing is just like looking at the end of the campaign, and we're sequencing for this. We obviously want our fundraising not to dip below where it was before. We have kind of a baseline of, this is about what we raise on an annual basis. We know that a campaign is going to inject a lot of life into a fundraising program. And our hope, if we do this correctly, is to have the annual contributions, the kind of regular operational fundraising revenue we can expect, not drop down to where it was pre-campaign. We want to have it sit on kind of that higher level and move forward so that our normal, what we raise on a year is much, much higher than before. What are the things we need to sequence to make sure that happens? So really in that timeline, it's just an outline to support your progress and get to each of these things as quickly as possible. We want to do it quickly, but the reason we structure it over those 3 years is obviously very intentional, is to sequence it correctly so that it's the least burden on the staff for the maximum revenue on the other end. All right. One of the last big pieces is just kind of the overall structure of the campaign. When we say organizational structure, that sounds kind of vague. What we mean by this are, who are all the people involved in doing the things for the campaign. You have lots of different groups. You might have outside counsel, you might have your board, you might have a second board. Some people have like a foundation board and a more operations or board that's actually running the organization in larger nonprofits. You might have a development council, volunteers who are just involved in fundraising. You might have a fundraising executive committee within your board. You might have new volunteers that you're recruiting. You obviously have whatever staff team is involved. That might involve other departments. If you're a larger organization, it might involve marketing. There's so many different pieces to this. What is everybody's role? And how are we functioning together? And can we set expectations for everybody on how we communicate, who's doing what job, so that as we launch, everybody has a very clear understanding of what the purpose of their contribution is to the overall effort. Obviously, this should be a group effort. This would be a lot of work for a single person to do, even if they're very experienced. So just kind of setting the guidelines for, here are all the pieces. This is how many hours we expect everyone has available to contribute to this. These are all the skill sets of the people that we feel like we have at our disposal. And here's how we're going to orient it. So coming out of the feasibility study, getting a really clear idea of the different players and groups involved so that you can use that to understand whose job is it to do what thing for the campaign as you look at your overall to-do list. One of the biggest components of this, obviously, is your volunteer recruitment and management. So building out a robust team of volunteers, if you're a Pride client, we love to get you north of the 30 people, sometimes up to 40 or even 50 people who are just dedicated to philanthropy. These are volunteers who give a few hours a month of their time to help maybe connect to new donors, maybe help tell stories or go on calls. And if they're comfortable, maybe even make asks themselves. But getting those people recruited and trained and oriented and visiting together in person so they had that feeling of being on a team and launching something together is so critical at the outset. It's one of the things we put right at the top of the list in the first 6 months, but it's relatively complex. Like, how do we put that together? Who do we decide goes on what team? We want a little bit of a mini roadmap inside of the big roadmap to figure out how we structure that. So we're trying to build out this volunteer organization. We want it to look like this in 6 months. What are the things we have to do over those first 6 months to have it look like that, so that for the rest of the campaign, the other 2.5 years, that we're actually doing a lot of the revenue production stuff past the lead gifts, we have that really strong structure and everyone's got a really clear idea of what their role and how to execute is. The last thing I just want to mention is infrastructure for success beyond the current campaign. And we're talking about the same entity. What are they going to do for us and what can we expect of them post-campaign? We don't want to overload them with so much work that they get burnt out. The idea is hopefully they get so excited about the work that you've done that just your overall culture of philanthropy is strong and they kind of stick with you post-campaign. If we do the right things during the campaign, we can really set up our future, not just for this kind of injection of cash in the beginning, but our overall cash past that. All right, next slide. Last thing we want to kind of walk through is, if this seems of interest to you, here's some of the situations where it's maybe a better time than others to actually consider doing one of these. This is fairly standard practice for a lot of nonprofits, but just kind of some situations where we see that you have the most impact in actually producing this. The first is your first big projects. So if you have some sort of a fundraising program that you've been raising some money, doing some things, but you're launching into a much larger effort, really a good idea to get this roadmap, especially if you've never had a campaign before of this magnitude. Very helpful to have everything that we discussed today. The second thing is kind of the same situation where you feel like it's your first big project, only because it's been so long since your last big project. If you're coming off a very large campaign, rolling into a phase 2, may not be super necessary to roll into a full study, but if it's been 10 years or even 8 years, 5 years, maybe even since your last big project, and you've kind of lapsed a little bit in engagement with your volunteers, with your board, they haven't had as much expectation of fundraising lately, could be super helpful to get a lot of this information and plan and major gifts kind of pushed up to the top to move you forward. The next thing is, if your organization takes a different direction with the vision, say you're operating in one space and the board and leadership open up this new branch or this new constituency that you're now serving, might be really helpful to find some donors who are then passionate about that thing. Not to say that we call it like scope creep, where you're doing too many things for too many people. We try to narrow it as much as we can. But if you have a new service line that's not as popular or not as visible in your community, being able to kind of realign your fundraising with your new strategic plan makes a big difference. Another great situation, Kind of in the same vein is new leadership. This can go for both your board or your executive team. They're going to have new ideas and a new way to push forward. A great way to quickly jumpstart a campaign or to jumpstart a fundraising program is to launch into a big project and raise money for something specific. And with a new leadership, it's a great way to make a big splash. We see this a lot of times. A new CEO comes into an organization and wants to kind of make some changes, ramp up their different revenue streams. And the fastest way to ramp up your fundraising revenue stream is to launch into a big project, which is obviously often prefaced by this. And the last thing is just needing to invigorate a program at some level. So you're maybe stagnant in your fundraising, you're doing fine, but you just can't seem to really break past that initial plateau. Again, this gives you a quick injection. So there's never really a perfect time, but if you're in any of these situations, you might more want to consider something like this just because it gives you a big jump start to something more. So anytime you're kind of feeling stalled or stagnated, or there's a big change coming, or there has recently been a big change, a great time to look at potentially considering a study. All right. With that, I will open it up for any questions. If you are watching this from the future and are enjoying the recording of this, feel free to, in the comments, type your questions there, and we will make sure that we get to those as quickly as we can. Happy to chat with you about any of the nuances or clarifications that we have. But for those of you live today, feel free to unmute yourselves or drop your questions in the chat.
So I've got a question for anybody on the panel, and it goes to the giving pyramid. And I was noticing on the giving pyramid, and I've noticed this over time, and I've never gotten a good answer as to why. So here's my specific question. If you look at the lower dollar amounts, and I think it was, you need 800 donor prospects to get 100 $100 gifts. So my question is this: I've worked at places previously where the CEO or board member said, let's do a mini campaign. It shouldn't be that hard to get 1,000 people to give $100 to raise $100,000. Why is that so why does that sound so easy, but it's so difficult to accomplish, I guess is my question. And as it relates to the giving pyramid, you look at that and you think, well, we're only going to raise $10,000 from $100 donors. It just seems like we should be getting more out of that. So if you could explain the science or the why behind that, that'd be great.
That's such a great question. I think, Michaela, we were actually presenting this on a panel last week, and Michaela got a really similar question to that last week. Michaela, do you mind sharing kind of your vision? I think you were the one who actually built out the pyramid for this one as well.
Sure. Well, there are a couple things that come to mind, Steve. First, I'm like, wow, that is so much work. Just the management of that volume of prospects is just like, it could be so much more expedient to go to a major donor. Of those individuals in your pipeline, there is somebody that has the capacity and interest in giving a greater gift. I think sometimes we forget that it really is important to ask people at a level that they're capable of, because it is in fact more inspiring to them. When they are giving at a level that like meets their capacity, their investment in your project fits with their ability, and that keeps them more engaged and inspired and feeling connected. If you ask somebody who has $1 million capacity for $1,000 donation, that's not quite as inspiring to them. They don't get to feel that happiness and joy of making that impact. And it just saves your staff time if you're focused on those major gifts, right? And it's inspiring. That gives you a great news story. Look at what we have accomplished. Doesn't mean that you don't want to bring everybody into the process. Like, you want a wide universe in this initiative, but by having lead gifts, it inspires your community to join in.
Yeah.
I know. Did I out?
One other point that really, I think, illustrates it for you, Steve, is St. Jude, one of the most successful charities in the world. Do you want to guess what their average donation size is? It's $47 is their average donation size. They clean up in the $100 and less donation category because they can. They have the brand equity. As soon as I say St. Jude, everyone on this call knows who they are and what they do. American Cancer Society, American Red Cross, United Way, March of Dimes. I could go down the list of these ones that are in the top 10 and have national branches everywhere. They thrive in that gift size because they can do it with web traffic. They can do it with just mailers. They have very little face-to-face fundraising with a staff of, in your case, 2 instead of tens of thousands. It's too hard to dedicate the time at that bottom level. So we often will use the giving pyramid as a way to show a board or an executive team like, hey, y'all, I know St. Jude does it this way. Here's why we cannot do it this way. We're a different entity entirely. A mom and pop shop doesn't sell groceries in the same way that Kroger or H-E-B or Publix does, the way that they market, the way that we advertise, the way that they price. We're almost different businesses. So though that does work for these charities that we know and love, it just for a small, and if you're under $100 million a year, you're considered small. If you're small, it's just too challenging to approach that lane.
Okay,
Great.
thank you. Yeah.
Other questions from the group? Now and in the future.
Jake
All right.
and Marty, a question that I've heard come up. So my board has gone through a strategic plan. They have identified exactly the project that we want to focus on and exactly what it costs. What is the value of conducting a feasibility study if we already know what we need to focus on as an organization?
I'll take it. So I feel like this happens often, right? Like we're like, we don't basically want to be told that it's not feasible. We already know what we need to do. We just need to go out there and get it done, right? The roadmap, the how you can get there most efficiently, and the starting to engage your constituencies would be the top of my list, right? Like by inviting people to participate and tell us their opinions on it, even if we're very confident their opinions on it are going to be positive because they were engaged in the strategic planning process, some of them, it just validates that. It gets them excited early on and it moves them along, like it cultivates them and stewards them in a way that you could not accomplish as quickly or as meaningfully, I don't believe, if you just go ahead and start. So I think it helps you also make sure that you are focusing on the right things at the right time. Jake kind of talked about the cadencing out. I just think if you just jump into something without the proper planning, then a lot of your other work was for naught because it takes longer or you don't hit the targets that you need to. Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Karen?
So what's the conversation with the board who has a project that really is important to the organization, and yet the study shows that it is not achievable, and the board then wants to go ahead anyway because they're convinced of the importance of the project, even though the study shows that it's not achievable at this time?
Wonderful question. And we have that happen occasionally. A lot of times we'll have a board who says, well, we need to raise money for a new parking garage. Parking is an issue, or we have to overhaul all of our IT. We're stuck in 1998 and it's causing all these issues. And those things may be important, but they're very difficult to market. It's hard to get someone really emotionally invested in a parking garage or an IT. So you can either kind of spin it in a way that like, well, we're going to raise less and it's okay. And we kind of are at the behest of the board. What we try to do instead is market something that is outcome focused. So it's like, okay, well, tell us more. So we get new IT system. What does that then do? It's like, well, right now we're able to serve 45% of our patient population. But if we have our computers actually work and we can get on Epic and everything is secure and there's no issues here, we can serve 78%. So we would then market the campaign around an operational increase to serve tens of thousands of more people for these service lines. So we can kind of spin it a little bit. So that is one option. Another option is you can say, okay, great. This project that you said is not as important tested really well. We're going to raise money and entirely fund this project, which will then free up the money that you can then spend on IT or parking garage. It all goes to the same checking account. So we still have the donors who are excited about supporting this thing. For all the way up until now, this has just been a cash loss for the organization. Now it's funded by donors, and you're still able to expand and do those things. And then the third option is you can either kind of go against them or not. So there's ways that you can kind of like bend and manipulate it. And that's part of the advantage of having outside people come in and manipulate it for you, is so that we can be the bad guys and say like, didn't test well, but if you're hell bent on the parking garage, here are the options. And then the board can hopefully make a decision from there. And our hope always is that it's data informed, saying, well, really can't control what the leadership's going to do, but we can present really clear, compelling data analysis and recommendations as to what will work for you. Anybody else have any other ideas or thoughts? Those are the kind of the 3 lanes that we typically go, but if there's other ones, certainly love to hear it. It's a great question because it does happen.
I was just going to say, I think the important point here, Karen, appreciate you bringing it up, is like there's at least a part of reality to that oftentimes, right? Like there's not always a super black and white, like best answer to things. But I think by having a study, you are able to position yourself again for the best path forward to get the most money possible, as quickly as possible, as meaningfully as possible, towards, the overall mission. But it can be challenging because it's very difficult to tell a board or a leader that their pet project, something they're really excited about or really need, is not going to be the best to present to the community for support. Any other questions? These are great. Really appreciate y'all's questions. Anything else for the good of the order? Feel free to scan that if you need a more in-depth conversation with a member of our team. Our website as well.